is October 7th, 2025, and reports say that the Trump administration is calling off diplomatic outreach efforts to Venezuela, raising concerns that they could be paving the road to an attempt at a regime change war targeting the Maduro government. All of this, as you also have the Trump administration taking steps that make it look like they are preparing for a direct attack on Iran. Yes, despite all of the concerns about how Iran could and likely will respond, what they could target, be it in Israel or in the US military bases across the region. Oh, but that's not all, because you also have Trump sitting there toying around with the idea of sending long range Tomahawk cruise missiles to Europe to then be sent to Ukraine. You've got all of this making it very clear that Trump is not pursuing peace. He's not truly ending any wars. Instead, his administration is continuing to pursue more endless war. So, what should we be keeping an eye on in the coming weeks? Well, we got into all of the latest with a special guest earlier, so let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is international relations and security analyst Mark Sleboda. Mark, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Rachel, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show.
Always good to have you. Now, I want to get your take on the latest here, as I know that the New York Times is reporting that Trump has called off diplomatic outreach efforts to Venezuela because he has, quote, grown frustrated with Maduro's failure to accede to American demands to give up power voluntarily, and, of course, the continued insistence by Venezuelan officials that they have no part in drug trafficking. Now, the report is warning that this move paves the way for a possible military escalation against alleged drug traffickers or also Maduro's government. So, how do you see it? Is the U.S. about to go to war with Venezuela?
Yes, it is. So first of all, I think we need to get rid of this ridiculous pretext discussion here. Actual analysis of drug traffic flows from South and Central America to the United States and to Europe clearly show that actually Venezuela is one of the lowest, if not the lowest, right, vectors of drug supplies to the United States. Literally every other South and Central American country that has the capacity for cocaine and various other drugs, it comes from there to a much greater degree than Venezuela. So that is obviously the pretext that is being used. And I'm old enough to remember a few months ago when Trump gave a big speech saying that he would end the policy, the destructive and counterproductive strategy of regime change and overthrowing governments and let countries decide. But I guess that was, Trump. He's now gone 180 degrees or 360 Annalena Baerbock degrees once again. So yes, I mean, this sign of cutting off whatever tatters of diplomatic relations were left. The U.S. continues blowing up boats in international waters. I mean, maybe they were drug trafficking boats, maybe not. Who knows, right? Because there's certainly no evidence presented. The U.S. has no jurisdiction. I'm just love how the United States, I mean, we see this with France stopping Russian oil tankers off the French coast in international waters this week. Well, they weren't Russian. They were actually flagged elsewhere, but they were just doing business. We see this with the U.S. Blowing ships out of the Caribbean. The U.S. and its allies are real famous for doing freedom of navigation exercise as they patrol their navies up and down off the Chinese coast and bluster and threaten and whatnot. But we clearly see that the only real threat to freedom of navigation in the world is the U.S. and its allies. Right? Forget laws of the sea and jurisdiction and evidence or anything like that. But there is certainly a process of escalation moving towards the beginning of regime change operations. Right? We have NBC and the New York Times both telling us that U.S. officials, anonymously, of course, are openly telling them they're getting ready to overthrow the government, right? And that's what this is all about. And that they are coordinating with the oligarchic opposition in Venezuela to, unleash them on the ground, to assist in any overthrow and to take over the country. Of course, with Venezuela having the largest proven oil reserves in the world, that's going to be quite a coup in terms of control of energy flows for the United States if this is successful. But it began, we see this pattern where now they're blowing up ships, but Trump has already been shifting on social media saying now there's no more ships leaving Venezuela because we've blown them all up. So we're going to have to start going after them on land. This is what he is posting on social media. And that is clearly, this escalatory step up to the actual invasion of Venezuela, right? Because he's already declared that Maduro is he's not a head of state. He's just a drug trafficker, right? And we've seen the U.S. use these excuses before in previous decades when going after various political leaders in Central America. So it's something that really, the U.S. media, the bipartisan support for U.S. Hegemony in Congress, no one's going to object too much to this when they go to remove the government of Venezuela. And there's no question that they will have the ability to do so. There will obviously be a decapitation strike. That is what the forces that are being built up there are clearly most geared towards, right? Tomahawk strikes by destroyers and the like. And then, the remaining forces, they believe that with several thousand Marines and special forces that they will be able to secure the capital for the opposition, who will then take over the country. That's what they believe. Now, what we don't know is how much the Venezuelan population will actually rise up in what will, essentially be counterinsurgency warfare in support of the Bolivarian Revolution or not, right? I don't know. I haven't been on the ground in Venezuela. I know I've talked to several people who have been, who swear up and down that they'll fight to the end, and so forth. But in the end, I can't judge that, and we'll find out. But I have zero doubt anymore that this is exactly what the Trump administration is gearing itself up for. The only question is, will this happen before another attack in Iran, with another attack of Iran? Because obviously the Trump administration can't get enough of war, despite his trying to brand himself as a peacemaker. Because the U.S. is also moving large numbers of refueling aircraft and fighters to Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, to CENTCOM, which is what it does whenever it's about to strike Iran. And we've also heard news from Israel about this gearing up towards that. So, while all this nonsense of a Trump dictated peace deal in Gaza is going on, there's at least a high likelihood that is mostly just distraction. So we're not paying attention to the U.S. military buildup there. And if that wasn't enough, of course, Trump is also now firing U.S. HIMARS into mainland Russia, which is something that the Biden administration did, but he has not done up until now during his administration. He stopped the practice when he came up, but now the U.S., of course, there's a fig leaf that it's Ukrainians doing it, but Russia has made clear they understand with these high-end systems that it's actually not only are Americans providing the weapons and the satellite data and green lighting every shot, but there's actually American specialists on hand to fire them. So that we've seen routine targeting with HIMARS, with American HIMARS systems, of a power plant in Belgorod, Russia, leading to blackouts in local blackouts in Belgorod. And to make matters worse, the American are firing from inside the city limits of Kharkov, right? Which is in range not of other artillery systems, but is in range of the U.S. HIMARS, and that, of course, is a war crime. Firing from a civilian populated urban area, and they can say any pretext about the Kiev regime they want, but this is Trump. Trump might as well be pushing the button on the HIMARS, firing missiles into Russia right now.
Wow. And it's interesting too, because as you're pointing out there, right, we're only, 9 months into Trump's second term now. And already he's going back to more and more escalations, right? He's got to go back to Venezuela because his administration didn't get it the first time around when they told the people, hey, this is your new president, Juan Guaido. The people didn't get on board. Maduro remained in power. He's escalating there. He's escalating against Iran despite all of the warning signs of, hey, Iran's going to continue to respond and it's going to be bad for Israel. Oh, and then he's also escalating with Russia. And it's interesting because Russia seems to be the only place where he's playing this game of, oh no, we're selling the weapons to Europe and Europe is giving them to Ukraine and then Ukraine is somehow magically on their own using them. But I mean, Russian President Putin has been very clear. He's warning, especially over these reports of whether the US would allow for the delivery of Tomahawk cruise missiles to Europe to then be sent to Ukraine. Putin is warning that, hey, this would lead to the destruction of our relations, at least the positive tendencies that have appeared in these relations. And he's also noting that Russia would see this for what it is, which is the direct participation of American military personnel. So, how do you see the current situation that the US is in being so destructive, but also almost being destructive in places where it seems like they don't have to be doing all of this, or do they have to, at least in their minds?
Yeah, Trump himself is saying, well, I don't know if I'm going to send Tomahawks too. Maybe I will. It depends on where they tell me they're going to fire them. I don't want to escalate, which is exactly what he's doing anyway. But yes, I see this not as some type of 5D chess plan or something. I simply see that this is the Trump administration foreign policy cluster F. They don't know what they're doing. They have different opinions within the administration, and different opinions between the administration and the deep state and the intelligence services and elsewhere. And there's no coherent policy here. Maybe Trump at some level doesn't want to get dragged back into an open conflict with Russia, getting dragged back, but he seems to have little power to resist this, and he doesn't want to get pegged as the president who surrendered, right, Ukraine to Vladimir Putin, right? I mean, that is um, Trump is all about winning, and he is very, very loath to ever put himself in a position of losing. But he doesn't appear to have the political will and capital to just walk away from Ukraine. So all that he is left with, as we discussed since September, is escalate to de-escalate, and that's exactly the trap that he has fallen into. However, we can guess, we can psychoanalyze Trump if we want and take a look at his posts and say that he doesn't really want to do it, but ultimately it doesn't make any difference because that is what the United States is doing. And I think all of us in the alt media probably need to spend less time trying to analyze Trump posts and paying more attention to what the U.S. is doing. As for the Russian response to this, right, to these HIMARS strikes, and now talk of sending Tomahawks as well, despite how really that is not a good idea. I mean, first of all, the Tomahawks are launched from either ships primarily, or bombers, neither of which they can transfer to Ukraine. And as for land based launchers, they only evidently have two existing of the new Typhon systems capable of doing that. So the idea that they're going to send them to Ukraine seems really far fetched. Plus, let's be honest. I mean, the Tomahawk is an old system. It's a legacy system. It's an 80s, 70s, 80s system. And it was very formidable in its day. And, against third world countries, it still is. But Russia's air defense, was designed specifically to bring down the Patriot. And they've adapted quickly, as Putin pointed out, to the ATACMS and everything else, guided multiple launch rocket systems, ground launch small diameter bombs, everything the U.S. has sent, Russian air defense and electronic warfare have quickly adapted to. And the Storm Shadows, the Scalps. There's no possibility, between the problems of launching it, the logistical challenges, the problems of Russian air defense taking down what are essentially slow moving old cruise missiles, right? It's certainly not going to gain him anything on the battlefield in Ukraine. It would simply be trying to quiet domestic and foreign voices that are demanding it of him, that he obviously doesn't have the political power or will to resist. And that will just draw him further in. And then, of course, what is the next escalation? As for the Russian response, that is actually a topic of heated discussion in Russia. And there's a lot of people coming forward and criticizing Putin for not being strong enough in warning the United States what this means. Because when Biden was president, Russia made clear that they regarded these missile attacks inside Russia as U.S. missile attacks inside Russia, and they were reserved the right to either transfer missiles to U.S. opponents, like say the Houthis, in response, or to actually attack U.S. military assets, bases around the world in response. Now, Putin is saying none of that now. All he's saying is, well, that will ruin what little good relations, if he thinks that such exist between him and Trump, that have developed. And Russians really, there are, I don't want to say Russians, there are voices in Russia that have been publicly raised in the political, in the media, saying that Putin is not being strong enough on this red line, and that he needs to, basically tell Trump, if you do this, we're going to hit you back, and that's it. And Putin is not doing that. Putin is still trying to play the diplomatic game with Trump, and presumably give him space to find a way still for him to walk away if he should ever choose to do so, with saving some degree of face in the process. And we can argue whether this is showing weakness or showing diplomatic statesmanship and guile, but it is a political discussion that is being had in Russia right now. Whether or not the Tomahawks would do real damage is not the most important issue. It's more the principle of the U.S. firing missiles into Russia. And then with the Tomahawks, if they actually use the Tomahawks, the question then becomes a strategic one, because the Tomahawks are capable, and in some points were actually primarily designed to be strategic weapons, that is, to carry nuclear warheads. And if a Tomahawk is hurtling into Russia, let's say towards Moscow, Russia will probably not be able to discern in mid-flight whether that is a nuclear warhead or a conventional one. And we'll have to make a decision. Is this a first strike attack? Do we need to respond in kind with strategic, meaning nuclear weapons? That is the dangerous, slippery path of firing Tomahawks into Russia. You can say, oh, the Americans wouldn't do that. The Russian military can't actually deal from that level. They have to plan for contingencies. They have to plan for possibilities. So that would be an extremely dangerous escalation by the Trump administration if they go down this path of tomahawks. And again, it wouldn't net them any real military value on the battlefield. So I can only assume that this is Trump trying to assuage, the political deep state and European hounds that are baying at his door and evidently present some type of political threat to him that he feels necessary to go down that path.
Yeah, even when he's just playing the game of, oh, I'll think about it. I've got to see how Kiev is going to use them. It's like, well, we know how they're going to be used, not because of how Kiev is going to use them, but because it's still the US using them, right? This game of like, oh, let me wait and see how Kiev is going to use the tools that I send to them that require American military personnel in order to carry out these attacks. Like, he acts like the public is dumb, and I guess a lot of the public may not be fully informed on that. That's why the media keeps on with this charade.
Dmitry Medvedev sarcastically quipped online in response to this. Oh, well, quite obviously they're going to fire them at Paris and Berlin, right? Where else would they
Right.
fire them? Which was obviously ridiculous. I mean, of course they're going to fire them in Moscow, right? That being the question. But I think Medvedev was just highlighting the absurdity of this charade of publicly asking the question and wondering what the hell is going on in the Trump administration that they're saying this as some type of rhetorical job. I mean, obviously, if they're saying it, the decision has already been made. So why are they going through this charade? Why, of saying, well, it depends on where the Ukrainians are going, the Kiev regime is going to fire them. They know that. I mean, the Kiev regime would have already told them that. So, it's not exactly clear what type of PR and political game the Trump administration is playing, but that appears to be what they're doing.
Yeah, and it is good to know about the frustration being felt within Russia, because I know that, Putin is in this position of trying to handle this chaos bomb that is Donald Trump, while at the same time also watching things on the battlefield, watching how they're going there. And I did want to bring up this other report from the New York Times because I thought it was really interesting that they're kind of admitting that Kiev is running into money and corruption problems when it comes to their defense industry. Now, of course, we're told that Ukraine has gotten rid of all the corruption, right? Don't worry about it. We weren't supposed to worry about it when we had the US and the EU and the UK sending an unprecedented number of weapons and other various forms of lethal aid and money. We weren't supposed to worry about the corruption then, or what percentage of the weapons actually reach the battlefield versus what percent are then traded on the black market. Oh, but now they're sounding the alarm about Ukraine increasing domestic production, saying that they're concerned about corruption there, that the contracts aren't right, and so on and so forth. So, what do you make of these warnings, and what kind of a position is Kiev in right now as they are seeing a lower amount of lethal aid and support coming from the West, while at the same time, Russia is ramping up production like we've never seen before?
Yeah, I think that this is almost reflexive, and I'm not so sure if it's really sounding an alarm. If it is, it's like that car alarm that goes off in the parking lot all the time, and you just, oh, shut up. Wouldn't you turn that damn thing off? I mean, that's how much seriousness it's paid attention, right? Everyone knows that Ukraine is one of, if not the most corrupt country in Europe, right? I mean, that was established in the Western media, even all through the period of 2014 up to 2022. It certainly hasn't changed since then. It's been acknowledged at various times in this conflict. There were European NGOs providing weapons early on, saying that 70% of them were being siphoned off to the black market at one point. Right? No one has ever said that Ukraine is not corrupt anymore. They just ignore it. And ultimately, of course, that is what will happen with this story, right? Because they're not even going that far. They're just pointing out that, now with the shift to try to transfer the Kiev regime money to make weapons in their own country, and part of the logic there is that the West just doesn't have weapons to provide them anymore. And the actual costs of making and transporting those weapons from within Europe are actually higher, right, in terms of labor and everything else than doing it in Ukraine. So they're trying to transfer the Kiev regime money and have them rebuild a military industrial complex in the middle of a war, which is just, it's stupid. And Russia is just pounding these military industrial facilities. I mean, to some degree, yes, it is a game of whack a mole, but I think by and large, Russia is pretty good at playing whack a mole with the Kiev regime's military industrial facilities, as we've seen with very large drone and missile strikes hitting such facilities pretty substantially this week. But ultimately, the truth is that the Western governments completely understand that there's corruption in the Kiev regime. And that's just the price of doing business with this proxy, that a certain amount of all the money and weapons that they provide is going to be siphoned. And, they might be doing their best quietly to reduce that to a level that the Kiev regime is still capable of carrying on fighting at the battlefield. But ultimately, their ability to do that is actually probably pretty limited. That might be where they actually experience limits in what they can and can't do politically in Ukraine, because again, corruption is just pervasive. And that has not changed. It's actually, if anything, only increased since Zelensky became president. So ultimately, this is kind of a non-story. It's nice to be reminded every once in a while that American and European taxpayer money is being siphoned off into the black hole of the various resort housings and investments that various European leaders have in the United States and in Europe. But ultimately, the the European political elite that are fighting this proxy, they don't care. It's just part of the price of doing business.
Yeah, it's a good reminder to every American watching, going, oh, wait a second, I pay how much in my taxes and how much of it is being sent over to Kiev. And yeah, we saw this with 20 years in Afghanistan, right? How much money and how many weapons did they ship over there that they had no accountability for? They knew they weren't going to win this war in any way, shape, or form. They just continued with the money laundering, and that's what we're seeing once again now, because it's become so normalized that that's how Washington does things.
How many residences does the just recently former Kiev regime defense minister have in the United States? Him and his immediate family members. I think it's 11 residences in the United States, and don't forget his art gallery there too. I mean,
all part of it. You look at Washington, they're like, why? This isn't weird. This is what we've been doing for a long time now, and it's what they want to continue to do. That is for sure. I know that there is certainly a lot at stake here all around, as you have the Trump administration trying to carry on more wars, launch new wars, whatever they can possibly get their hands on. And I always appreciate you taking the time to join me to break down all of the latest here. International relations and security analyst Mark Sleboda. And y'all be sure to check out his work at boosty.to/therealpolitik. Mark, thanks so much for your time and insight.
thanks for having me.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment, and as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you'll find ad-free videos and new weekly episodes of my exclusive series for paid subscribers called Sanctioned. You can also check out Sanctioned over on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/RachelBlevins. As always, thank y'all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time